Welcome to everyone who's able to join us today. Thank you again for being here. I'm Thais DeMarco. I'm with the MA LGBT Chamber of Commerce, and we are so happy and proud to bring this content to our LGBTQ plus community this week with an entire job week and a lot of content related to how our folks in our community can look for jobs and jobs that are going to be accepting and that are going to be affirming and places where we can be ourselves. And the content today, as you all know, is specific to folks in our community with disabilities. And we have our dear friends from Triangle who are going to talk about that. I'm going to introduce Janice, who's going to kick us off in just a moment. But first, I would like to call your attention to a couple of functions that we have today. There's a chat box, and we are going to ask you at certain times during the workshop to pop in answers and to interact with content that's happening, and just to pop your answers into the chat box when we ask questions and need your input. And then the other thing that we have is a Q&A function. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please pop your questions into the Q&A box, and we are going to address them at the end of each section. And then we're going to have another chance at the end of all of the presentations to address any general questions that you may still have. So again, chat box for answers to questions that the presenters are going to pose to you, and then Q&A if you have any general questions for the presenters that we're going to address at the end of each presentation, and then again at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, Janice Philpott, Workforce Development Director at Triangle. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate that you're willing to share content with us today.
Greetings, everyone. We hope that you are well, safe, and healthy. In this uncertain time, it is good that we have some mode to gather together, to share, to learn, and hopefully today encourage you in your professional job pursuits with some information, some skills, and most of all, insight into the world of employment. I am Janice Philpott. I am the Director of Workforce Development at Triangle. I am joined today with my colleagues, Jeff and Allie. They will do extensive introductions when it's their time to do their section of the presentation. So I won't steal any of their thunder, but allow them to do that for themselves. It is good to have each and every one of you here. Let's begin. I'm going to share my screen with you. And my intent today is to begin to have a conversation with you that will allow you to see and understand work maybe a little differently. So can everyone see the screen? Are we good? Thumbs up if we are. Perfect. So we will move through these slides. I have about 4 or 5 of them. The chat is being monitored. The Q&A is being monitored. If you have a question, please pop it in there and we'll get going. Okay. The first thing is we're going to talk about from my perspective is what is work? I actually have the pleasure of teaching adolescents and youth, and the first thing they always say it's money. Well, it's not. Okay, that's an aspect of work, but that's actually not work. And then let's talk about job seeking, what to know and what to do. Changing your mindset changes your actions, and it changes the actions of other people. What's very important is to remember you have control over work situations and understanding how you're defining it and how you are viewing it. So let's talk about the concept, which I believe, and I think I introduced to Triangle when I first arrived, was the dignity of work. Work is the fulfillment of personal responsibilities. Those can be to yourself, to others, to your belief system, or to the world itself. Those are your choices of how you find and define your personal responsibilities. Work is one such essential responsibility which shapes and fulfills human dignity by providing for the needs of oneself and one's family. Work is an essential means by which goods and creative capacities of human beings are engaged. So in a lot of ways, work is the opportunity to do good in an area that you choose to spend your energies. The beauty of work is we're gratified in a lot of ways. We're gratified in terms of monetary gain, yes, but there's a creative piece about work, and there is an enjoyment about work. There is a structure about work. there is an interest about work. I think what I'm trying to communicate to you is let's redefine what you mean by work in your life. So when you go to pursue it, or when it begins to pursue you, and you engage with people, that you have a good perspective of what you see as work. It will help you in your professional life shape and really create a pathway for yourself, the dignity of work. Designing your story. The next thing I want to do is to help individuals understand that when you go to pursue some form of work, having your story clearly defined in your head allows the person who you're engaging with to see you and the real you and what you want to do. Usually people view interviews as a one-sided. They're going to ask me a bunch of questions. Well, here in Triangle, the way in which I use workforce development is to help all the individuals come through to design their story and to tell their story. People want engaging, interesting, fun, happy people working for them. I can tell you, if you don't smile in an interview when you come to work for workforce development, we're not giving you the job. We like happy people. We like fun people. We'll tell you, before we got on this webinar, we were cracking up. We were having some fun and laughing and joking. You know, life is about living and being positive and doing that. So let's start. My work. The way you design your story is to begin to answer these questions. And I encourage each of you to begin to take notes. Okay, let's do this live now in person. Okay, what do you do? Okay, not what you're paid for. That's a difference. What do you do? Okay, that's a part of your work. All right, I'll use myself for an example. I fix things. I'm a fixer. That's what I do. I have pretty much understood myself that any circumstance I begin to become engaged in, I try to fix it. Okay, now sometimes people appreciate that. Sometimes they do not. But having that awareness about myself allows me to create my story. Some of my friends said, Janice, I just need you to listen right now. I don't need you to fix anything. Okay. I admire Olivia Pope. Some of you may remember that wonderful TV show called Scandal. She's a fixer. I loved it because that's me. I'm a fixer. Okay. When I did it, what's an event that you can think about when you decide this is what I did? So example, when's an event that I fixed something? You know, what was an issue that I fixed? How do I do it? What is your methodology in doing things? Okay, that helps define your work. So let's back it up for myself. What do? I'm a fixer. When I did it at major events. I'm a big fixer at major events because things can go seriously wrong at major events. How do? I do it through communication. I am very good at making sure when a major event is happening that everybody is on the same page and that we understand what we're going to do. But in addition to that, we are all in communication during the event. So I insist that people who I supervise during major events have technology. Everybody wears an earbud. Everybody has a two-way on them because I need you to hear me. No matter where you're at, I need you to hear me. So I, in my story, go, I'm a fixer. Major events are a strong point for me and communications a highlight. Why do I like this work? Now, name two things, and think about this. Name two things you like about your work. Okay, if you want to throw them in the chat, Michael's there. If you want to throw them up, if you want to, contribute, let's hear it. What are two things you like about your work? I have my two things. Okay, my two things are, I like the energy that events bring. Okay, that's what I like about my work. I like the energy that events bring, and I like seeing the results. Okay, so my story is energy and results drive me. Okay, think about this. If you're sitting in an interview and you have your story in your head and you begin to tell an event, this is what I do. This is what I did. This is how I do it. And these are two things that give me joy from doing it. Right then and there, you've created a story that has given them a great deal of insight into you and the type of person you are. It's also shown that you are introspective and that you understand yourself and how to be successful in working conditions. Those are the things that you want to communicate. Yes, we have to respond to their questions, but we should have a story that as soon as the open-ended question comes about, tell me about yourself, tell your story. Have it written out. Don't have a list of, I'm hardworking, I show up on time, I'm reliable. That's fine. That's great. That's not the answer that's going to get you the job. The answer that's going to get you a job is having your story designed and telling that story. And the next thing I want to say is take the time that they give you. If someone in an interview says to me, tell me about yourself, say, sit back, get relaxed, take about 5 minutes and tell them the story. Everybody answers in like 45 seconds at most. And then they go, oh, was that too much? It's never too much. It's an interview. You want your story told. You want to be heard. Okay. Next slide. Here we go. Okay. And part of your story, share one thing you learned while working. Okay. When you think about that, what's one thing you learned while working? What motivates you? Okay. That's a good one to get in because bosses, supervisors, colleagues, they want to understand why you do what you do. What's your passion? What's your interest? Why does it motivate you? I tell people the story, some of you may or may not know, but I was formerly a special ed teacher for many years in the public school system. And people say, why were you a special needs teacher? And I say very simply, because my brother had special needs and they thought he wasn't worth teaching. That's it in a nutshell. I have taken a majority of my life proving them wrong, that people with special needs are worth teaching. Okay. Ask one question to the person you are talking to. Interview them. Flip it. Remember I started with the sentence, change your mind, change your mindset? Change the conversation and interview them. What do you like about your work? Why are you here? What brought you to the organization? What do you really do for work? I know what you told me your job title is, but what do you do for work? Because remember, we're changing the definition of work. We're looking at it as a dignity. We're looking at it as an all-encompassing thing that gives you space to continue to grow and evolve. I'm going to stop for a second because my screen came down. Is there something in the chat, Michael, or in the question and answer?
Yeah, we had a couple answers to your previous question about what they do, what they like about their work and what they do. We had one answer that said, I can work with students on professional development. I also like that I have a fun team to work with. And then we had a couple other answers that said they like the community at their workplace and they like feeling like they contribute to something.
Okay, so thank you for that. And let me back up and say, when the individual who said the community piece, ask them to define community. When you go into that interview, ask them to define community. Let's see what they think community means and if it's the same thing that lines up with your community. Okay, because that's a nice word that we use and it sounds great, but let's get the definition of that clear. And for the team people, the question you ask the person who used the word team, ask them how they run or manage a team. Okay, ask them how they run or manage a team. It's all good to be a team. Okay, but that how the team is managed and how the team is run is very different. So let me give you, and I say this because it's a good example. I am not a New Englander. I am a New Yorker. Let's just make that clear right off the bat. Okay, so this whole thing with this Patriot stuff and this, love of it, I'm okay because I live here among you, but okay, it's a good example. The Patriots have a team culture. Okay, now let's look at New York. New York has a team culture too. They are two very different cultures, and those teams are managed very different ways. Okay, to this day, you cannot have facial hair and play for the New York Yankees. To this very day. Now, that's a team culture thing. New England Patriots or the Boston Red Sox, Lord, we would have to hire 4 or 5 barbers just to get them cleaned up, not even shaved. Okay, so why do I mention that? I mention that because they're teams, they're winning teams, but the culture of those teams are very different and the supervision of those teams are very different. So let's ask that question about how do you lead and manage a team? Okay, that's very important. Any more, Michael? Did I hit the major points?
Yeah, that was all of the responses that have come in so far.
Okay, and then for the person who said they like to help with resume and cover letters, try to really incorporate this thought into when you work with someone about a resume, about their story, because the resume should line up to the story. Okay, That's a good way to look at how to design a resume that people just doesn't go, you know, let it parallel the story. You know, let it line up to the life. And then when they say, well, what happened in between these 2 years? The story fills in the details. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, now this is a little fun activity. We teach acronyms, again, public school coming out in me. We use a method called CAR, okay? It's an acronym. It helps you remember. So when you're sitting in the interview, and oh, let me stop for a second. Now that you're on Zoom, this is great. All right, let me say this. People who don't like interviewing on Zoom, no, let me set you straight. You can have all the notes right here on your laptop when you're looking at Zoom. When you're in a professional interview, it's hard to have a lot of notes in front of you. They usually, you know, give you a portfolio and you have to make, in Zoom, you can look straight at the screen and have your notes right at the bottom and they can't see them. Okay, so you really have a method to have some mnemonic devices. You might even have one that says calm down. I got a staff person who uses so many inspirational phrases. I walk in and I go, where am I? You know, breathe, smile, happy. It keeps her going, which is fine. But you can do it now and have a much more comfortable interview via Zoom. Okay, so this is a CAR method. It's challenge, action, and results. Think of an event, an actual event, something that puts you to the test in your life. Okay, what action steps did you take to go through that challenge? Something you did to improve your situation. And then what are the results? What are the actions and outcomes? What is the end result of the challenge? This is key for you to communicate because this is what individuals want to know. They want to know, how are you going to face a challenge? Because work itself, it doesn't matter what type of work you do, there is a challenge. And they want to know that you have mentally and sometimes, oftentimes physically prepared for this challenge. So let's use the CAR method and pre-think it, think it ahead of time, think about it now. What challenge, actual event have you been put in place? What were your action steps? And what were the outcomes and the results? Let me give you a one that was not funny in the moment, but if you look back, it is funny, okay? For me, public school teacher again, I was in charge of students who had severe disabilities, okay? And I had 2 aides in my classroom. One of the students was a bolter. That's a student that just takes off and runs. They just whoop, gone away from you. So you always have to have them holding their hand or, you know, close to you so they don't bolt and run away because, of course, danger is, you know, imminent at that point. We had a fire drill. We have to evacuate the school. I said to my aides, take Baba, 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 meet in the designated area outside. We get to the designated area. I have my checkbook. I'm checking off the students' names to make sure we got everybody out the building. I turned to the aide and I said, where is, I'm making the name up, Mary Jo. She looks at her hand. She literally looks at her hand and Mary Jo was in there. And I'm like, why are you looking at your hand? You know if you were holding someone's hand or not. You don't have to look to check. What's wrong with you? Okay. Gone. Kid gone. This was a school of 1,000 students. And we were all outside for a fire drill. And the kid was about 3 feet tall. It was a young child. I lose it. I go, what? You know what happens in my head. The parents, the cops, 6 o'clock news. Okay, you're done. What was my action? I immediately ran to the fire chief and the school principal, and I said, you have to let me back in the building. And they're like, are you crazy? I was like, no, you have to let me back in the building, because at that time we had really advanced, it was a brand new school. So we had outdoor PA systems installed for folks when they were on the playground, so you could actually hear outside. I said, you have to let me in, we've lost Mary Jo. The principal looked at me like, this is your last day of work. I go, I know, but I still got to find the kid. Okay. So the fire chief and I went in the building and I got on the PA system, and in the loudest voice I could, I told everybody to shut up. I did not even ask them to be quiet. I said, shut up. All right. And then I said, the 6th grade class. The 6th grade class, listen to me. We have lost Mary Jo, because they knew who she was. I said, I don't know where she is. Everybody else sit on the ground and let the 6th graders find her. And all the teachers sat every student down. And the entire 6th grade class got up and they swarmed that building. The fire department cleared the building, let us back in. We're calling the parents. I got 911. And all of a sudden I see a crowd of about 13 kids. And they're like, we got her, we got her. Now she's in the middle, just being dragged, overwhelmed and frightened. Why? Because all these kids want credit for finding her. And here she comes all the way down. And we get her and we, get the nurse, we check her, she's fine. She was hiding under the bleachers in the back of the field, all right? As an educator, I never would have known to go look in a tube of a bleacher behind the field. But sixth grade kids know. They know where to find each other. And happy ending. We found her, the parents were fine, they were okay. I didn't lose my job. What was the challenge? A lost child. What was the actions? Being able to think through and understanding your resources available to you. Sixth grade kids. Know the resources available to you in your jobs, folks. What's available? It might even be outside your job. I have a friend 911 list. When I'm in trouble, I call friends sometimes. What was the result? Making sure that we got someone safe and rewarding the sixth grade class for listening and being a part. What's the point? You have challenges in your life. Think them through. Think how you survived them. Think how you responded. Think how the results were. Tell that story and people will get great insight into you. Let me keep moving. Last thing here is sweep. Teach you something to use on Zoom. Zoom is not the medium that we're normally used to interviewing in. So we use this word called sweep. It stands for, you can figure this out, it's very easy. Smile, wave, eye contact, enthusiasm, I like that one, and good posture. Okay, we get in Zoom and we do this. Or, yes. No, up straight, get a good chair. Don't get a chair that rolls because then you'll start going off the screen. All right. And make sure you can sit there for about 35 to 40 minutes comfortably because that's what it's going to take to get through a Zoom interview. So again, smile. Hi, I'm Jen. Wave. People don't like to wave, but you have to wave because we used to shake hands. This was formerly known as sweep in our world. Sheep in our world, but now we call it sweep because you wave. It is acknowledgement of another individual. It doesn't matter whether it's between Zoom or another medium. It's an acknowledgement. So, hello, my name is Janice Philpott. Pleasure to meet you. Okay. Michael, I'm getting a question and answer again. Can you help me?
Yes. Hi. Yes. The question that just came in is, what's the best way to make myself stand out at the beginning and end of an interview?
Okay. In the beginning of the interview, use language. Okay. Practice your language. So for example, I say when I'm meeting with someone a little bit unusual, I go, it is a pleasure to meet you today. Those are words that you normally, people go, hi, how are you? Thank you. Those are very common. Find some uncommon words. It is a pleasure to meet you today. Looking forward to this opportunity. Find different language. Stay away from the common stuff. Don't go, yo, yo, what's up? Now that's inappropriate, okay? But I am thrilled to have this opportunity today. This is going to be the highlight of my day. Say something unusual to make them hear you, and then think about how you want to leave an impression with them. My staff can tell how I'm feeling based upon my emails, okay? When all is well and the world is going, I end my emails, cheers. I do that because I'm very big about traveling to Europe. I love Europe. I got to get out of America. No offense against you. I just have to go live in Europe because I learned in Britain, cheers. I've gone to England multiple times. I love it. Cheers. So I incorporate that in who I am. Cheers. That's how I end mine. When they know I'm not happy, it's like JP, nothing. That's it. Okay. So learn the language that embodies you. I have a friend who goes, bravo. That was wonderful. You think, wow. Right? You really have, and this is what I mean. You have to find a language that represents who you are and use that. Don't conform. That's not what I am saying. Do not conform. Find out who you are, tell your story, and apply the language that exemplifies you. And then that will cause you to stand out and make a difference. Okay? All right, that's it for me at this point. Michael, I'm going to let you have some time, question and answers. We're going to rely on him or something in the chat. I think I can get to the chat if I stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah, so thank you, Janice. If anyone has questions for Janice's section of the presentation, please put them in Q&A now and I'll read them out before we move on to the next section. So I'll give everyone a minute or so to put things in Q&A in case they have any lingering questions. And then if you think of anything after the fact, we'll also be doing a wider Q&A with all three panelists at the end of the session. So don't worry if you think of a question like in 5 minutes and you think it's too late, we'll just get to it at the end. Want to let's say thank you for the content. It was extremely helpful.
You're most very welcome. Oh, good. I stayed within my 30 minutes too.
Cool. All right, so it looks like that's all we have for questions for now. Like I said, if you think of anything else, pop it in the Q&A, just mark it that it's for Janice, and then we'll get back to it at the end. But for now, I think we can move on to the next presenter.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Lafada Hernandez. My pronouns are he, him, his. And as part of the Triangle team, I represent EPIC. And today I'm going to be working with you all a little bit to give you information on your rights as people with disabilities through the process of seeking employment and once you are employed, and some things to know around your rights, but also what is your responsibility in all of this. I'm also going to share my screen. Although there will be time for questions in the end of my section, I'm also cool with, if you have questions in the moment, to feel free to type them in. Michael, feel free to interrupt me to share said questions, because I really want to make sure I'm giving you all the content that you're looking for. Really quick, EPIC, like I said, we are part of Triangle. Our mission is to prepare young people with disabilities to be actively engaged community leaders, and we do that through education, leadership development, and community service. We have 3 program areas: our Service Warrior program, which is a service learning program for transition age youth with disabilities in the Boston and Worcester areas. We run youth support groups, which are youth-led, adult-supported, and we provide community trainings to youth and adults with and without disabilities across New England to address ableism, inclusion, and advocacy. If you do want to learn more about EPIC, you can visit Triangle's website, triangle-inc.org, or go directly to EPIC's website, epicleaders.org. So, Janice has talked to us about some of the skills and things to do in order to help get a job and be prepared for that process. Like I said, I want to talk to you all a little bit about your rights in this process. So the ADA, for those who may not be familiar, is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is major legislation that was passed in 1990 originally to provide equal access for people with disabilities in their communities. And that's equal access for everything: employment, education, healthcare, housing, transportation, you name it, there should be equal access for people with disabilities. So as far as what we're talking about today, Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act has to do with employment. So it is to remove barriers to equal employment for people with disabilities. It prohibits covered entities, so your employers for the most part, or potential employers, from discriminating on the basis of disability in all employment practices and during all stages. And by all stages, we mean the moment you submit your application, and even that application should be able to be provided in a way that's accessible to you, to interviewing, to hiring, to onboarding and training, to your time in that position. And the ADA requires reasonable accommodation for a known disability of an applicant or employee who is qualified, barring undue hardship. And we're going to talk about the undue hardship stuff in a couple minutes, but it's really important to realize that those accommodations come into effect from the moment you apply. If you need an accommodation, you can request that in the application process, and then of course, once you're hired into the position. Really quickly, the ADA in their definition of disability is very vague, much like most legislation. And it says a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The key parts to this are major life activities. So that includes things that we think about a lot when it comes to disability. Things like walking, talking, seeing, hearing, learning. But this also includes things that we don't always think about, like sleeping, utilizing the bathroom, eating, right? These are all major life activities. So if you have a physical or mental impairment that limits one of those things, you could qualify under the ADA. The other piece to this is the phrase substantially limits. Now, I tell people to think of two things when it comes to this phrase: severity and duration. How long is this disability going to affect you? For example, if I break my arm tomorrow, I'm in a cast for a month, and afterwards my body heals back to its status quo, that would not be a disability, right? However, if that's results in a permanent injury that I'm not able to return back to my status quo, it limits my mobility and use of my arm, that could be a disability because it's not limited in time. Severity, again, how much does it limit your daily life activities? And this comes into play with certain disabilities that we know all disabilities are on a spectrum in the severity in which it may affect your life. So there are disabilities that are covered, but depending on the severity that it affects your major life activities would qualify you as having a disability or not. For example, I have arthritis. At this point in my life, it does not affect my daily life activities. I might have an occasional flare-up for a couple days, it goes away, done. However, 5-10 years from now, that could be a different story for me. And in that case, I would be covered under the ADA. So what I really want people to take from this is the definition of disability is much larger than we tend to think about. We tend to think about physical, sensory, learning, types of disabilities, cognitive disabilities. This includes mental health diagnoses. This includes things that we generally think of as illnesses or diseases, right? Cancer is covered under the ADA. HIV and AIDS is covered under the ADA. So the disability community that we're talking about here is much larger than we generally seem to think about in our society, which I think is important for you all to know and where you may be covered under the ADA and where you may not. So if you have a disability, you have a right to reasonable accommodations. And a reasonable is an important word in this phrase, and we're going to get into that. But generally speaking, accommodations are any device, technology, service, or change to programs, policies, or the built environment that enable individuals with disabilities to perform essential functions or to equally participate in events or programs. There are hundreds and thousands and millions of possibilities of what an accommodation could be, and they look different for everyone. Everyone's accommodation is different because it depends on their disability and how it affects their mind or body. Here, though, we have some examples of what some reasonable accommodations could be. So removing barriers and increasing physical accessibility. This might mean moving desks around, getting rid of cubicle walls if they make it inaccessible to a wheelchair. Modifying a schedule. So maybe there's more breaks built into a schedule. Maybe someone starts later in the day due to a medical condition, right? That can be an accommodation for folks. Obtaining or modifying equipment or devices. Assistive technology. And that can run the spectrum of a special type of mouse for your computer, a pad for you to sit on in your office chair, to specific pieces of technology and computer programs to run for you to be able to do your job. Last one is providing services. So interpreters, ASL interpreters, real-time captioning, things like that. These are all considered reasonable accommodations. So now knowing what a disability is, that you are covered under the ADA and what examples of accommodations are, let's go through the process of applying and obtaining a job to figure out what are your rights in this process and what are your responsibilities. So first question is always, am I qualified for this job? You see that job posting somewhere, are you qualified? So as it says here, a qualified person is an individual with a disability who meets the job's general requirements and can perform the essential functions of the job desired or held with or without accommodation. If you need an accommodation to do the job, that does not disqualify you. It means you can do the job, okay? So there's two parts here to think about. One is, what are the requirements of the position? And these can be very general. And this is one area where I do encourage people to be a little bit flexible and ask some questions, okay? So examples here, a certain level of education, right? Maybe you're applying for a job that says you need to have a bachelor's degree. Doesn't have to be in a certain field of study, but you need a bachelor's degree and you don't have one. However, you might have 20 years of experience in this field that actually make you more qualified than someone who's just graduating with their bachelor's degree. In that case, I would encourage you to apply, right? And then you need to sell yourself. Ability to lift 60 pounds. For some reason, a lot of people like to put this in their job descriptions, and I don't understand why. But this is a great example of, if you're going to be getting a job at FedEx and it's a position getting the boxes off the truck and you can't lift 60 pounds, you know that's a job requirement, right? However, if you're applying for a receptionist position, they're probably throwing this in just in case they need you to move the box of printer paper across the office. That's something that may not really be required of you, an essential part of your job. So I would still apply. Driver's license is another one that comes up a lot. So the question is, do you actually need a driver's license, or do you need reliable transportation? Again, if I'm applying to work at FedEx to drive a truck, I need a driver's license. I gotta be able to drive the trucks that they have. However, at Epic, for a lot of our staff, their jobs require them to get around the state to different schools and partners and to meet with youth. They need reliable transportation. As their supervisor, I'm gonna be honest, I don't care if you drive your own car, you take the T, if you're using Uber, if you decide to run to get some exercise, as long as you are able to get from point A to point B on time, that's all that matters, right? So some things under the requirements for the position can be flexible. And I encourage you, if you think you're still qualified, to apply and ask about them in the interview. Now comes to essential functions and secondary functions. So essential functions of the job are exactly what this position is about. So you need to be able to do these essential functions with or without an accommodation to be qualified for this position, without question, right? Your accommodation cannot change these essential functions of the job. If it does, you are not qualified for the job. The secondary functions, those are more questionable. You may not need to do them. And that's where some of these things like a receptionist carrying the box of printer paper across the office, that's a secondary function. That is not the primary function of their job, okay? So if you are not able, you see that list of essential functions, if you are not able to do them with or without an accommodation, you are not qualified for that position. Michael, are there any questions or anything at this point before I move on?
None so far, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at any time.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem.
All right, so you've decided you're qualified. You apply for the position, you get the interview. So some things around the interview. If you need an accommodation for the interview, not if you need one if you get the job, but for the interview, it is your responsibility to request that accommodation when you set up that interview, right? So some accommodations might be clear as day to you. I need an American Sign Language interpreter there. It is the responsibility of that organization or company interviewing you to obtain that interpreter and pay for that interpreter for your interview, right? Maybe you know that I need things in large print or digital versions of things. So maybe you give them a heads up of, if you're gonna give me any paperwork at this interview, can it either be this size font, or can you send me a digital version of this as a reasonable accommodation? Other things to think about, as much as I would love to pretend that every building in this world is accessible, we all know they're not. So if you require wheelchair accessibility, I would give them a heads up of, I'm really looking forward to this interview on Tuesday. Just so you know, as a reasonable accommodation, this interview needs to take place in a location that's wheelchair accessible, right? And that could be something as simple as making the interviewer think, our office is accessible, but my office is really small. Maybe I should reserve the conference room for this interview to make sure we have enough space and are comfortable, okay? So it's your responsibility to request that accommodation, and it's their responsibility to provide it. Now, in an interview, there are certain questions they cannot ask you. They cannot ask you about your disability status. Whether you have a visible disability or not, they cannot ask you. They cannot ask you medical related questions. And they cannot ask you about accommodations. The only question about accommodations at this point is if you request one for the interview and they have a clarifying question in order to be able to provide it for the interview. Again, but that should happen before the actual interview takes place. Otherwise, they cannot ask you. They can't even say, oh, so we have a sign language interpreter here today. Is this an accommodation you would need every day at work? They can't ask you that in an interview. However, they can ask you things that might try to get at these topics, okay? So they can ask you general questions. Tell me about yourself. Tell me why you're interested in this field. I can tell you at EPIC, as a disability organization, where the majority of EPIC staff historically have been people with disabilities, when I say this, because it's a disability organization, it's a safe space, disability ends up coming up in that answer, right? But that is up to you whether you disclose that or not. Next, they can ask you if you're able to provide the essential functions of the job, okay? So I can't say, hey, I notice you use a walker. Can you lift 60 pounds? But I can say, one of the job requirements is that you're able to lift 60 pounds. Are you able to do that? And you can answer yes or no. And your answer can be yes without any explanation. You don't need to say yes with an accommodation or yes without an accommodation. Yes or no. Yes, I can do that. And again, your ability to perform specific job duties. So again, it can come down to something specific. Are you able to take care of telephone calls? Do you know this computer program? Are you able to do X, Y, and Z? They can ask you those questions as long as it has to do with the specific job duties. If they ask you about your disability, you at no time have to answer that. You have the right to tell them, that is a topic that I don't feel comfortable discussing right now, or that's a topic that I don't think applies to this position at this point in time, and move on. So you've landed the job. Congratulations, okay? Once you are hired, once again, you need to request the accommodation and do it through the appropriate channels, right? So if you get a job and you know from moment one there's an accommodation you're gonna need, request it. And in every company, organization, employer, the channels are different. It might just be going to your direct supervisor. It might be going to someone in human resources. But if anything, you ask the person who's guided you through and offered you the job, who do I talk to about this, right? And request that accommodation. Next, if you know what you need for an accommodation or something that's worked for you in the past, be as specific as possible. Say, I need a screen reader program. I've used this one in the past. I would like this as an accommodation to be put on the computer that I use. You should know that employers are able to ask you for a doctor's note if they need some sort of guidance on an accommodation. That is their right to ask for that. And employers are not guaranteed to provide the exact accommodation you requested. Now, this is important. So there's a couple things to think about. One, it changes the essential functions of the job. If you've made it this far through the process and you're now asking for an accommodation that would change those essential functions, you're no longer qualified for the job. For example, at EPIC, we have a lot of staff that teach in Boston Public Schools. If I had someone come in and after being hired, they asked for an accommodation of changing their schedule for them to start at noon every day, that would change the essential functions of the job because most of our school teaching happens before noon. So if you're not able to do that, you're no longer qualified for this position. Whereas there are other jobs in EPIC where I could make that accommodation, but not for those specific jobs. Two, they might be able to provide an equivalent accommodation. So again, going back to the example of a screen reader program you want put on your work computer. They find another program that says it does the same exact things, but it doesn't cost as much. They can give you that accommodation instead, as long as they're doing it to meet those same needs that you have. So you may not get that exact program, and instead they'll give you an equivalent program or an equivalent accommodation. And the last part of it is undue hardship. I think this comes up very rarely, but thinking about one financially, first of all, and I tell organizations all the time, most accommodations will not cost you a lot of money. However, if you were to come in and ask them to completely rebuild their front entranceway, that might be an undue hardship, right, for the whole company. And that's something to be aware of, right? If someone applies to Epic and they ask me for an accommodation that would be an undue hardship on Epic's budget, that doesn't count because we're part of Triangle. It's an undue hardship of all of Triangle, right? So one would be the money part. The other piece is if it's a health and safety risk to you or others that you'll be working with. For example, right now, if you had a medical condition where you are not able to wear a mask, but you're expected to be working in proximity to other people, that is accommodation that they could turn down because they could see that as a health and safety risk for you and others. The last part of this is as you're given accommodations, there should be a system of monitoring and adjusting those accommodations. Not every accommodation is going to work, right? Maybe they did give you an equivalent and that equivalent doesn't work. And so you need to get them to give you the other accommodation, or an accommodation that worked in your last job doesn't work in this job. And that's fine. There should be a process with your supervisor or HR that every couple months, you're just checking in. How is this accommodation working? Do we need to readjust? Do we need to think of something else to ensure that this works? And that should hopefully be an open dialogue between you and that person to ensure you're getting the accommodations that you need. Michael, I've seen some notifications pop up before.
Yeah, I was just about to let you know, we actually did just get a couple of questions. Okay. The first one is, I feel like employers still discriminate against people with disabilities. What are the rights to fight this?
Well, I agree, they do. And they make assumptions about what you can and cannot do. And this is why I tell people, whether your disability is visible or not, do not disclose it until you have to, right? If you need the accommodation for the interview, disclose it. If you don't say anything, right? Go through the interview process. However, if you do feel like once you're in a job that you're being discriminated against because of that, there are actions you can take internally. Like first, I would go, if my supervisor I felt was penalizing me because I needed an accommodation or because of my disability, I would go to HR. I would go to their supervisor. I would file a grievance, right? That is your right to do. And then if there are things that happen, if you are terminated and you think that is an undue termination based on your disability, there are resources that I would direct you to. I would direct you to the ADA Center. I would direct you to a local independent living center where they can give you the supports and direction you need to go in order to make sure that you get what is rightfully due to you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. The next question is, how do we find employers that will respect accommodations? Are there specific job search databases that account for this?
Unfortunately, there are not job search databases that I'm aware of. I would also say it depends on what level of support you may want in the job search process. Again, you could potentially work with organizations like Triangle, like an independent living center, where they may have a better idea of companies and organizations who specifically seek to hire individuals with disabilities. But unfortunately, I don't necessarily think there is a good way of knowing unless you're able to speak to people within that organization or who worked there before.
All right, thank you. We just got another question, which is, has Zoom changed any of the expectations around job interview accommodations?
To be honest with you, God, I hope so. So I think a reality is that many of us with disabilities in the past have applied for jobs. We've asked for accommodations that we need to work from home, either all the time or certain days, a certain amount of time. And historically in the past, we've been told that's not possible for this job. And this pandemic has shown us how ableism works. And all of a sudden, when everyone needed that accommodation, it was totally possible. So I am hoping that moving forward, once we get to a post-COVID world and it's safe to be in person again, that many employers will be more open to accommodations, whether it's within the interview process or in person at work, to have working from home in Zoom as an accommodation on the job. I think as far as accommodations you may need with Zoom is things like closed captioning on the Zoom or a sign language interpreter on the Zoom. Closed captioning can be really helpful, not just for folks who are deaf and hard of hearing, but as far as processing for some folks, it's easier if you can see the captions at the bottom of the screen as well. So there are accommodations like that too that should be able to be provided if you're doing a virtual interview.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, that is all we have for questions for this section, but as with previously, if you have a question for Jeff that comes up later, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, just mark that it's a question for Jeff specifically, and we'll circle back to it at the end. But other than that, I think we're ready to move on to our third and final presenter.
Alrighty. I did just notice a question came in. Do we want to save that?
You're right. They got in right before the buzzer. Sorry, Jeff, you're back on the clock. What should I do if a job doesn't accommodate for me? Where do I go?
So again, if it's an accommodation that is reasonable, it doesn't meet any of those qualifications that would make it unreasonable. My first question would be, is there somewhere else within that job to go to, right? If you asked your direct supervisor and they just said no, I would go above them. I would go to human resources. I would go to their supervisor. I would go to whoever is next in line. If you're working with human resources or someone high up in the organization and there's nowhere else to go, that's when I would then turn to those community resources. I would return to the ADA Center, the New England ADA Center. I would turn to an independent living center, turn to potentially a lawyer, right? I do think these disability organizations are a good first step, as they can help navigate you before you need to shell out money to a lawyer if you want to go that route. But I would first see within my employer, is there someone else I can go to after they've said no? File a grievance and see what I can get. And if not, then what are the resources outside of my employer that can support me in ensuring that I get the supports that I need?
All right, thank you so much. All right, Allie, I'll turn it back to you again.
Alrighty, hi everyone. I am also going to share my screen, and I will apologize in advance. I have a little sniffle, so in case that interrupts any of my talking. Let's see. Can you all see this, the presentation? Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. Lovely. So my name is Allie Tellerico. I'm a program coordinator at Impact. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about Impact, and then we'll talk about some skills that we can utilize in the workplace to help ourselves to feel comfortable, calm, safe, and supported. So what is Impact? At Impact, our mission is to empower people with and without disabilities to recognize and prevent abuse. In order to get the best work done, live our best lives, it's important that we learn and practice skills to stay safe in all areas of our life, in school, at home, in the workplace, in the community, in the different types of relationships we have in our lives. The main topics that we teach at Impact are things like self-defense and self-advocacy. This includes learning both verbal and physical skills in order to keep ourselves safe with people that we know and people that we don't know. Healthy relationships. I teach a lot of lessons about communication skills, healthy decision-making skills. Sex education. The subject is very important to me. It's important that we know not only how our bodies work and things like that, but also that we're aware of others' identities, boundaries, things that can come up within these healthy relationships that we have. And then finally, internet safety. This is all about recognizing red flags on the internet, online dating, healthy decision-making, and all that jazz. So today I want to talk to you all a little bit about strategies for healthy communication, boundary setting, and also advocating for ourselves in the workplace. So what is a boundary? What kinds of boundaries can we set in our lives? In our everyday lives and in many of our relationships with others, we're constantly setting boundaries of some sort. Maybe your friend asks to FaceTime to say hi, and you're feeling like, you know what, I'm a little tired. I'm going to say no today, but maybe another day. Maybe your boss asks you to work a weekend shift, and you're trying to decide if that's something that would be comfortable for you. Boundaries are so normal and so important in our lives. Even for those of us who like to make others happy and help all the time, it's still really important that we set boundaries to take care of ourselves. So then we can continue to take care of others in whatever capacity that we do or that we need to. It might feel intimidating, but you are 100% allowed to set both physical and verbal boundaries at work. So let's talk about a couple topics that we might feel like setting boundaries around in the workplace. Pronouns. You deserve to feel respected and feel like your identity is seen in the workplace. If a coworker or a boss or a manager, a client were to misgender you, you can absolutely set a boundary and communicate to them which pronouns you go by and want to use. And as a reminder, like, your gender identity is always valid. This is, a boundary that could come up. Disability and accommodations. Some people are comfortable. We just talked a little bit with Jeff about disclosing disability status and things like that. Some people are comfortable disclosing that they have a disability, and some people aren't. Everyone thinks and feels differently about their disability. People are going to want or need different accommodations, and there's no one way to exist as a person having a disability. People need different things. So a person with a disability has just as much of a right to set a boundary, ask about accommodations like we just talked about. Work schedule. Sometimes the jobs we're interested in already have a set schedule and have work hours that they're looking for. Other times we might be applying for or in a job where those hours are more flexible. So maybe we're feeling like we need to set boundaries around hours that we are working. That could be something that we might want to communicate with others about. Any other examples of this? I'll mirror what others have said during my part of the presentation. If there's anything that comes up that you're feeling like you have a question about, or if you want to respond to any questions that I pose, please feel free to write in the chat. I think at this time I'll probably just move on, and we'll continue to go through more slides because I have a couple of other interactive parts that we can get to later. So let's talk about what some of these boundaries might sound like. I don't feel comfortable talking about that at work. I'd rather keep that private. Can you please use blank pronouns when referring to me? I can do this myself, but thank you for offering. I'm going to take a quick break. I think when we think about the whole boundary setting process, or if we hear someone say that they want to set a boundary or that we should set a boundary, I think that can be really intimidating, especially for people who maybe are not used to setting boundaries, or for people who are kind of like people pleasers, which I am. So like something like this, learning how to set boundaries has been a really valuable skill. And I think that sometimes we might overthink what that skill looks like, and it could be something as simple as stating things like this. Like, these things are pretty common collected statements of boundary setting. It doesn't have to be something that's said in like an angry manner, and that kind of brings us to what I want to talk about next is like types of communication. There are different ways that we communicate with people. Something that I teach my students is to think about the tone with which we communicate. Some of us might have quick tempers and feel like we're quick to anger. Others might feel like they don't want to bring up an issue at all because they feel bad or they don't want to cause problems. I really feel this, and I understand these feelings. I myself am someone who in the past felt like it was so much easier to be passive and not really bring up things that were an issue. Let me get these 3 types of communication up here. Some people might feel like they are quick to anger and quick to get upset about something. Other people might feel like, it's an issue. I don't really want to bring it up. I'll let it slide, but then it keeps happening and happening. Like I mentioned before, you're all, everyone is valid and deserving of having their voice heard. We might feel like I said before, it can be a little difficult to set a boundary, but that's kind of like, we're going to continue talking about this here. Assertive communication is kind of like our in-between. Oh, I can't show my mouse on here. We've got listed on the screen, we've got passive, aggressive, and assertive. So that passive communication is kind of like let's say we have an issue with something, someone says something that makes us feel uncomfortable, and we think, you know what, I don't want to make this into a big deal. I'm just going to not bring it up, not say anything about it. At the other extreme, we've got aggressive, where someone might just blow up right away and get really angry about something. And that third option, assertive, is kind of like our middle ground, where you're asking for something that you need, but also remembering to stay calm. It's really, it's advocating for yourself and, allowing yourself to feel whatever emotions that you're feeling. But also it's important for us to remember that there is a time and place for our emotions. It's absolutely valid if something happens and you're feeling angry or frustrated, but maybe in that moment, if you need to communicate that feeling to someone, it might be less helpful communicating that in an angry, loud way, and maybe more helpful communicating that in like a calm way, where you're talking about, here's the problem, here's how I'm feeling about it, I really need this to happen. And this kind of brings me into this next part here, speaking of this assertive communication. One of the tools that I often use with students and with clients is this tool that we call Steps to Speak Up for Yourself. And like I mentioned before, when we aren't used to speaking up or setting boundaries, it can feel intimidating and we might not know exactly where to start. So this is something that, as we go through these steps here today, this is something that could be something that maybe you fall back on if you feel like, maybe I'm not that great at bringing up boundaries or like remembering to set them. This could be a format that we remember, okay, I can just fill in the blanks here. I can fill in with whatever is happening to me in this moment right now. So I want to take us through an example here of how we can speak up for ourselves in a way that feels comfortable. This can be something, when we think about speaking up for ourselves, this can be something that we do in the moment when something happens. It can also be something that maybe afterwards, like we take some space, we calm down, and then revisit, hey, this thing happened. So let's take a look at the lines here for this sort of steps to speak up for yourself activity. The very first part of this, the part that I forgot to put right before this line, is to do something to calm down and to stay calm. When we're advocating for ourselves, we want to make sure that we are, even if not completely calm, in like a calmer state of mind, because sometimes when we're feeling angry or upset, it can be really hard to think. So we want to do something to calm down first. And in this template, one of the ways, some of the phrases we can use to advocate or to speak up can be something like, when you blank. That blank is whatever that behavior or problem is that you don't like. When you do this thing, I feel, say how you feel, because, explain why you feel that way. And I need or want blank. And this is where you ask for, what do you need or what do you want in this situation? And I think with this strategy, this is a way that we can both say what we need, but also share how we're feeling. And I think sometimes that can feel really good in the moment, or when you're talking to someone like, hey, this thing happened, I'm feeling really upset about it. I sometimes remind people to remember we can't read people's minds and they can't read ours. So sometimes, we might not show that we're feeling any certain emotion. We might not show that we're upset about something, but inside we're really, bubbling with anger. sometimes it can be really helpful to tell someone, you know, when you did this thing, or when I saw this happen, when I heard this, it made me feel really upset. It made me feel uncomfortable because for whatever the reason. And that kind of brings us to that last sentence of, you know, I think I'd be more comfortable with, or I want this in the future. I need you to do this instead. I need you to refer to me this way. I need some help talking about this. Yeah.
I just wanted to drop a quick note. It's not a question, but someone just left a comment. They want to say, thank you for these examples. It's really helpful to think about this in a very specific way. And we actually did just get a question.
Oh,
Good timing question, person.
yeah.
How can I be assertive without being rude?
That is a fantastic question. Yeah, I think it's hard because when I hear that question, the immediate thing that I think of is that people all interpret other people's like behaviors and personalities and voices differently. Like you might be listening to me, and everyone in this group that's listening might have a different interpretation of like how I sound right now and what the tone of my voice is. So sometimes when we are trying to be assertive and set a boundary, it can come out sounding aggressive, even if we don't mean it to. And I also think there's some fault in there of how society maybe tells us what does that look like, or what does it sound like when we're setting a boundary. There are certain people maybe that society says, oh, you know, it's normal for this type of person or this gender of person to set a boundary. But then when this type of person or this person with this gender sets a boundary, then it comes off sounding bossy or mean. So I think in terms of asserting yourself, but also not coming across rude, I think definitely making sure to be calm and like be in that calm place, doing some kind of a grounding or coping skill, which we'll talk more about in a few moments. But also maybe even just leading with, instead of saying something like, you know, we need to talk about this, or can I talk to you? I know that sometimes people will hear words like that and think immediately that something's wrong. Sometimes even just in changing the way we address things, instead of saying, you know, we need to talk about this, or I need to talk to you about something, we can instead say, there's something on my mind that I need to talk about. I have a question about something. I noticed that something happened the other day and I'm feeling really upset about it. Can I talk to you about it? I think sometimes if you need to approach someone to set a boundary with them, sometimes it can be helpful to ask if they are in the right space or have the time to address that. So maybe saying, you know, there's something that I want to talk to you about, like, is now an okay time?
Allie,
Yeah.
can I jump in a little bit with a suggestion also that we found to be neutral, especially with work? We call it find your neutral space. Be neutral, okay? Be neutral. Try not to employ emotion into it, and that's very hard because that's the slippery slope when people interpret rudeness, because there's a tone or an intonation or an action or a behavior. So we practice an activity called find your neutral space, and learn to be neutral in your tone, learn to be neutral in your body and your affect. Just find your neutral zone. You have to practice because we really don't live in neutral zones. But once you become neutral, people stop because they're so used to not being neutral or you being a certain way. To go neutral, to give them nothing to judge, then becomes that assertiveness that you're looking for. It seems counterintuitive, but become neutral. And then that is assertive, because most of us never live in neutral. And and people stop and they go, whoa, okay? And they can't judge it, but it's neutral and it's assertive. A classic example is I had a person who injured himself and he was being stereotypical and not being able to receive help. And I went neutral. And my way, and talking back to the person who was here earlier, the words I used, instead of saying shut up, because he just kept talking and talking, and he's bleeding over us, I said, stop talking now, in a very neutral tone. Stop talking now. Boom. And then I was able to bandage his wounds and service him. And my staff said, that worked. And I said, you just have to be neutral. You have to go into a neutral place because that then empowers assertiveness. So try practicing a neutral zone and get in front of a mirror, body, tone, just go neutral on it. And that gives you the assertiveness you're looking for, I think. Give it a shot.
Yeah, I really thank you so much, Janice. I appreciate the input. I think there's definitely a space for having both of those things. I'm wondering if maybe that neutrality, when you are starting to get to know potential employers and really like, you want to not show that you are not frazzled, but we're all going to get frazzled by things sometimes. And I think people know that as humans, we're not robotic, but I think there definitely is a time and place for the neutrality and that could be really helpful. And then I think in other places or other times, let's say when you are comfortably in a position and you're working and you have like trusted managers and people who you can go to talk about things. Maybe that's a place where it feels more comfortable to be a little more emotional. So for myself, I feel very comfortable having been at Impact for almost 2 years. I feel very comfortable going to certain people to talk to them about things. So I might feel a lot more comfortable going to my manager and saying, I'm really upset about this. Like I want to talk about it and I want to come up with a plan to deal with it. Because that person is someone who is used to kind of how I operate, what my personality is like. So I think that's I think having both of those options can be really helpful. Having people that you can confide in and say, this is how I'm feeling, and I need you to hear this and help me solve something. And then also being able to say to someone, this is what I need. You're doing this, or so-and-so is doing this, and I need this as a result. Having like both of those things. Yeah, I want to switch gears for a moment. And the other part of what I wanted to talk to you guys, now that we've talked a little bit about some different types of communication, some skills that we can use to communicate and share that like something is bothering us or that we need to advocate for something. The next part that I want to talk about is adrenaline management techniques and practicing grounding techniques. This is something that I think we sometimes only think of in the moment when we feel adrenalized. But it's important the reason I want to talk about this now is because we can use adrenaline management skills, grounding skills, coping skills in our everyday lives and in our everyday interactions with people. So what is adrenaline? Adrenaline is the hormone in our body that can activate when we are under a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and we're feeling scared. It can often make us feel physical things within our body when we're feeling this adrenalized and anxious state. So I'll give you an example for myself. I can tell when I'm in an anxious, adrenalized state because maybe my heart is starting to beat faster. You start to get like butterflies in your stomach. What are some things that, if anyone here wants to write into the chat, what are some things that you notice in your body when you're feeling adrenalized, when you're feeling really uncomfortable or nervous? Like, what does that feel like? I'll give people a moment to write if they would like to, and also no pressure if you don't want to.
There is one that someone just messaged only to me, so I'll just read it out, which was that their legs shake, like if they're like sitting.
Absolutely, yeah, maybe like bouncing our legs or our legs shaking involuntarily. Yeah, absolutely. We might feel like our ears ringing, maybe like our body starts to sweat. I did see a little notification there.
Yeah, another one just came in that said, I feel tense and I clench my jaw without realizing it.
Absolutely. Something that I've been noticing in myself lately is I've been kind of like clenching my jaw and grinding my teeth when I don't mean to. It's really important to notice those things. It's important to notice what our body does so that when we realize our bodies are in these adrenalized, stressed out states, what can we do in this moment to care for ourselves? Whether that's like a big way, a small way, what can we do to stay present and stay in this moment and to deal with these feelings that are coming up? And they're all of these things are all very normal and very natural responses too. You know, there's no one right or wrong way to have a stressed out reaction in your body. It's different for everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about the ways that we can cope with these feelings when they come up, because this could be something that very well happens when you are in an interview for work, when you are at your job, when you're talking to a client or talking to a coworker. You know, you never know if something may come up that is triggering. If there's something that's going on in your life that's just making you feel this anxiety. So I would love to know what are a couple of things, if anyone wants to throw a few examples in the chat, what are some things that you do either as a coping skill or things that make you feel calm? Something maybe that you use to calm down or to ground yourself. I'm thinking for myself, something that I have been, it's funny, one of the things that's really great about Zoom is we talked a little bit, I believe Janice was saying, oh, on Zoom, you know, the people you're interviewing with can't see all the notes on your computer and things like that. Something that I do when I'm on Zoom is something that I do when I am on Zoom is I will often have a stress toy of some sort, or like something to fidget with in my hands while I am on like a Zoom call, or while I am, you know, talking to someone, teaching. I constantly have kind of like a fidget toy or something like that. Other people might listen to music. People might do some sort of like imagery in their head and think about like a calm place. Someone might, you know, if you're feeling upset about something, people like to go for walks, take a nap, things like that. And all of those are fantastic skills that we can use to cope and ground ourselves. However, we know that some of those things aren't always achievable in that moment. These aren't always, you know, if you're at work and you notice that you're in this stressed out, adrenalized state, we can't just go into our office and take a nap. I maybe probably not for most people. You might not be able to, if you're in the middle of talking to a coworker or a student or a client or someone you work with, you might not be able to just get up and say, I'll be right back. I need to go watch a movie. As much as that would be wonderful. So we need to talk a little bit about, I want to talk about some skills that we can use in the moment, things that are small, but that are beneficial in helping us to remember, like, we're in this moment, you know, we can deal with this stress in the moment and then afterwards take space. So what we're going to do is I want to explain, we have plenty of time. I want to explain just a few techniques that we teach at Impact for adrenaline management. And yeah, we'll go from there. Some of the things that you can practice, let's say, you know, you're in an interview, you're talking to someone at work and you're feeling these feelings come up. Some of the adrenaline management skills that we teach include something we call finding your breathing. So if you want to do this along with me, you're absolutely invited to. You don't have to if you don't want to. So if you do decide that you want to do this along with me, you can close your eyes if that's comfortable or keep them open. And I want you to just breathe for a couple seconds in through your nose and out your mouth. And just picture where in your body that breath is. As you're breathing, do you feel the breath, you know, coming from your stomach? Do you feel it in your chest, in your throat, in your mouth? This is something that is very small, and because we are all constantly breathing, you know, it looks very natural, and it's just a natural response. So sometimes sitting in that moment, you know, maybe if you're in a meeting, you might not want to close your eyes. I'm not sure, to each their own, but you might be able to, in a moment of stress when you're around other people, focus on where that breath is in your body. When we get really stressed out and it's really hard to think clearly about things, picking one thing to focus on, maybe where that breath is, thinking of it as like a tangible thing, like the breath is sitting in my belly, like thinking about that can keep us rooted in this present moment. Another one that I really enjoy and that I teach to students is tapping. Sometimes we might just need that physical touch, again, as a grounding technique to keep us present in the moment. If you're not around other people, what you might be able to do, something that we'll teach is like, stretch your arm out, make a fist with one hand, stretch your other arm out, and just do like light tapping across your limbs, on your chest, on your stomach, tap your face, bring yourself back to that present moment. When we're around other people and we can't do that, sometimes something as simple as like squeezing your fists, wiggling your toes, sort of stretching your neck. And all of these things, bringing attention to these body parts, letting that stress out, even in just a simple way as like squeezing your fingers or toes, noticing where that breath is, can remind our bodies to slow down, because we know that when we're adrenalized, sometimes we start to escalate, sometimes that breathing, that hyperventilating might go up. And then the last one, like I mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, is taking a moment to imagine a place where you feel happy or where you feel safe. Imagining think of a place that makes you happy and what smells or sounds or things are accompanying that, who is in that place. Yeah, and I think they're important things to practice, because then in the moment when we are adrenalized, it can be really, these sorts of skills can help us to remain grounded. Just as we start to sort of wrap up my section here, how can we use the tools that we talked about today in the workplace? We can set boundaries with coworkers, managers, and bosses. We can speak up if we're upset or uncomfortable about something. And that's not always going to be something that we can just snap our fingers and now I know how to set a boundary. I can do this every time now. Because sometimes it's just not realistic. And for some people, it's really hard. I'm someone who has a lot of difficulty setting a boundary. So it's something that we need to really practice, and something that we want to, that even if we don't feel confident about it now, that's okay. And just the fact that we are practicing and being aware, oh, this is something that I'm comfortable with. This is something I'm uncomfortable with. Maybe I could talk to someone about this. We can talk to someone that we trust and who we can ask for help. It's always important that in the workplace, you have someone or a few people who you can go to and bring to them your concerns or your feelings about things. We always want to feel supported by the people that we work with. And I think it's important to our feelings in the workplace of like, I want to get things done. I want to be a good employee, but I also need to feel really supported by the people who I work for and work with. And then finally, practicing grounding skills. We can do these things in our office. We can do these things when we're alone. Some of these things we can do when we're around other people and they won't even notice. Start thinking about the things that make you feel grounded and maybe practice those just in random moments, like around the house or with your family members or wherever it is that you live or who you live with. Like practice some of those skills so that in the moment you feel prepared to use them to sort of manage your stress. Yeah, and that's about it for my section here. Are there any questions about anything that I talked about?
Thank you so much, Allie. And yes, if anyone has any questions for Allie or any of the panelists today, we do have about 5 minutes left in our scheduled time, so please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box now, and I'll be happy to read any questions that you might have.
While we're waiting for people to submit questions, I did think of another resource to the person who asked around if you feel like you have been discriminated against or treated differently, or there was an issue around accommodations in the workforce. Another local resource is the Disability Law Center based out of Boston. So in addition to disability employment orgs and independent living centers across the state, that is another resource. And the ADA Center, that's another resource that I would recommend to folks.
And I have tried to reach out to my staff. We did compile a list of employers that we know as being disability friendly. So we do have that list. What I will do is get it over to the chamber, and the chamber can feel free to put that up on their website as a resource. We'll be happy to share that with you. they text back and said, we're in a Zoom meeting too. We'll get to it afterwards. So I guess my entire team is on a Zoom meeting now, but we'll get it over to the chamber when we're done.
Thank you. We appreciate that. This isn't a question, but one person just wanted to say thank you for this. It was so helpful. I feel like I have tools that I can use.
Yeah, thank you for everyone who could be here.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came. We really appreciate you being here today, both to the panelists and to the attendees. This has been the final webinar of our full week of Fall 2020 LGBTQ+ virtual job fair. It's our second virtual job fair of the year. We usually do 3 in person. Obviously, in-person job fairs were tough to do this year because of coronavirus, so we wanted to play it safe, and we did virtual. We hope you all have enjoyed this presentation. And I just want to say thank you again to each of our panelists. We super appreciate your time volunteering and helping us do this, and I'm sure all of our attendees, and they're leaving comments now saying thank you, so I'm sure they've gotten so much useful knowledge and tools and strategies out of this webinar, and we can't thank you enough for helping us out by doing it.
No worries. It's been our pleasure to share the afternoon with you. Peace, healthy, strength, and happy holidays to you all.
Yes, happy holidays. And job fair will continue. There are jobs up on our job board. If you go to malgbtcc.org, we do have a job board there. So if you are currently seeking a position, feel free to check that out. We have a bunch of job openings that will stay up there beyond this week. But other than that, I want to thank you all again and wish you a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Everyone.
folks. Thank you.
Bye.